Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Logos for a very special liturgically inflected reading featuring Jesse Bertron and Tiana Clark. Logos is a project of EcoTheo Collective where our mission is to celebrate wonder. And we are so very delighted and overjoyed that you've joined us for this very special reading with two of our most luminous contemporary poets. Here at Logos, we seek to digitally, these days, evoke transcendence through poetry, ritual, and conversation. I'd like to give you just a sense of where the Logos ethos evolved and share our story of origin before giving you a quick overview of how our evening program will unfold. So Logos started with a conversation. A good friend and I were talking about poetry readings and how transactional they can sometimes feel. We discussed how sometimes it can feel as if you're either passively absorbing poetry as an audience member or you're just offloading it on folks from a podium. And we started wondering about what it might look like to artfully, lovingly, non-dogmatically infuse elements of sacred ritual into the format of a poetry reading. And thus was Logos Poetry Collective born. Typically, we gather at Lazarus Brewing Company here in East Austin, Texas. So if you would, I'd invite you to imagine being gathered beneath some beautiful bistro lights in a wonderful convivial location, gathered around picnic tables with abundant chips and queso and guacamole and well-crafted libations spread before you on the table. And what we'll do in just a moment, this Logos is a liturgically inflected format. After this welcome, we're going to begin by responsibly reading an opening text together. Because Zoom doesn't do well picking up from multiple microphone sources, I'm going to ask you to keep your microphones muted, but you're going to see some bolded lines in our opening poem, this invocation poem presented on the screen in front of you. And I invite you, even though your microphone is muted, to speak those words aloud so that you can add your voice to that of the collective. Following the reading of our opening text, we'll introduce our first poet, Jesse Bertron, and then our second poet, Tiana Clark. Following Tiana's reading, we'll have a chance to enjoy some curated conversation together, and then we'll invite you to commune with us by sharing a bit of what's upcoming for Logos, and we actually have a few exciting announcements to communicate to you during our invitation to communion. Our experience will culminate in another responsive, collaborative reading of a closing text. And I would like to mention that both this Mary Oliver invocation and our Jane Kenyon benediction have been selected by our poets as poems they particularly love. So what I'll do now is I'm going to ring a prayer bell, and I would invite you to take a moment to just ground and center yourself in the space, to close your eyes if you'd like, to bring your awareness to your breath, to the presence of spirit. And after the ringing of the bell subsides, we'll read our opening poem together. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here.
Don't hesitate. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy,
don't hesitate.
Give into it.
There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed.
Or about to be. We are not wise.
And not very often kind.
And much can never be redeemed.
Still, life has some possibility left.
Perhaps this is its way of fighting back.
That sometimes something happens better than all the riches or power in the world.
It could be anything.
But very likely you noticed it in the instant.
When love begins.
Anyway, that's often the case.
Anyway, whatever it is.
Don't be afraid.
Of its plenty. Oh, Jesse. Joy is not made to be a crumb. That's the best part!
I'm sorry. I had my screen dropped out, Tiana.
Hold on, we have to read. I have to read that. We have to give that line its presence.
Yeah, go for it, buddy. Do it.
Don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb.
No, it is not. Thank you so much for starting us off with not a crumb, but a feast of joy and exuberance, Tiana and Jesse. That was, I think, the best reading of an opening invocation we've ever had at Logos. Thank y'all so much. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our first poet, Jesse Bertron. I'm sorry. Let me just say the kindness that I built this poem for, and then get out before I make things any worse. These lines from the poem Dear Jacob depict a scene, as do many of the pieces in Jesse Bertron's debut chapbook, A Plumber's Guide to Light, from the husky heft of a maker's trade. The speaker offers the reader something a bit indecipherable, an apology, an absolution maybe, a puzzling over questions of self and work and world and all the systems and contingencies that conspire to corrupt or condemn our daily efforts at goodness, at simply making something good. What the poem absolutely offers, like all of Bertron's work, is honesty. Here are poems that do not intend to merely gild the everyday in meaning, but which lift it a little, for us to see it in its true and bare humaneness. If you Google Jesse Bertron, the biography the internet rustles up is wonderfully spare. It reads, Jesse Bertron is a plumber's apprentice living in Austin, Texas. He has an MFA in poetry from Vanderbilt University, where he studied with our co-featured poet, Tiana Clark. His poems have appeared in Rattle, Boston Review, Texas Highways, Ruminate, and the Massachusetts Review. He's the author of the aforementioned chapbook, A Plumber's Guide to Light, an amazing book I commend to you, out this year from Rattle. He's co-director of poetry at Round Top, an annual festival in rural Texas. This bio, like Jesse's poems, relieves of all pretense and revels in what truly is. Jesse's poetics are hard-looking and hard-won. They seem to split and solder truth from language in a somehow easy yet effortful accuracy that also marks his chosen trade. If the word poesis originally meant maker and vocation means to be called, the beauty and the wisdom forged to Bertron's lines feels as if they call inevitably out from the deliberate work that only comes in an honest act of making. And what gleams forth is an honesty so palpable it floors you, calls you. In the conclusion of Dear Jacob, he writes, I worked with you when I thought I'd be transfigured by my job. You didn't. You rushed through work to meet your wife at the travel agent, to hear her tell you about Rome, the chapels so dark and full of art that they seem lit by what is made. Bertron's poems offer such a work-wrought light as to illuminate in searing clarity the world we move in after reading them. How blessed we are to be warmed and lit by that making as we welcome to Logos, Jesse Bertron.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Travis. That's a really sweet intro. Thanks, y'all. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. Really appreciate y'all being here. Yeah, I'm going to read a bunch of poems about plumbing. I'm going to start with a poem about my boss, my old boss, Shorty, and it's called Shorty. Here is a question about love. No, it's about my boss. No, love. Forget what I just said. How do you speak about a man who you watch all day long, bringing him bouquets of wrenches, who you are always coming up to saying, Shorty, would you check this solder? Shorty, is this flame too high? Shorty, help. The vinyl that was smoking has caught fire. The poet Garrett Hongo says, the apprentice puts his body where the body of his teacher is. I can never remember the quote right, open to feedback. But I remember that it made apprenticeship sound like a sexy thing. Shorty, if you're reading this, please stop. That was a joke. Of course you aren't reading this. It's a poem. Shorty, you're a 52-year-old journeyman doing trim out in a muddy tract house in the 1,000-year floodplain of the lower Colorado River. Why does it feel like an insult, Shorty, to tell the truth? You will never read this poem. I wouldn't be insulted if somebody said, you'll never earn as much as Shorty in a year. You'll never turn around a house as fast. You'll never make a truer solder. No one groping blindly in the dark after a trade will ever feel as safe working with you. No one will ever want to say your name all day. I swear, all day. Shorty, Shorty. Even after work, I'm saying how it is with Shorty is. I think now about school. All the school I've been to, many years, with Shorty, sitting on a 5-gallon primer bucket with a toothpick, watching me, sometimes talking, watching me flail beneath a hall bath lave, saying, that's okay, mijo, that's okay, each time I curse, and then finally taking the channel locks and doing it right so I could see. Teachers used to sit with me. Together, we would study some third thing. Shorty wears a silver bracelet that shines like a lamp, and underneath it is the hand. Meant to start a timer for this reading. I'm starting it now. Rock and roll. There's a poem called Slop. Just Shorty represents one shining pole of craftsmanship, and there's a poem about another pole of craftsmanship. Slop. Looks good for my house, is what we used to say. Good enough for government work, is what we used to say. Blind man loved to see it, or sometimes just fuck it. Slop is what I've heard it called sometimes. The measure you're allowed to fall short of perfection in your work. We're not building violins, is what we shouted at a guy who wouldn't use a board. He'd cut a 16th short. To be honest, more than skill, it's knowing when to walk away that separates a good tradesman from bad. You don't want to hire or work for a guy who will spend all day sweating a detail no one will ever see. But there's the other side. Say there's a tiny gap between a toilet flange and its drain pipe, and you let it slide. Then, when the wax ring goes, a little water mixed with human shit will leak onto the floor with every flush. Slop. It is important stuff to learn. The only way to learn it is by looking at your boss. You have to trust the guy who's teaching you. Connor Finn, yes, absolutely. Tonio, yes. Shorty, pretty much. But Jacob, who I work for now, I just can't trust him when he says to leave a thing alone. I've never once seen him start over. If I ask him, is this good enough? He will say, yep, it's fine. Or sometimes, let me take a look. And then I watch in horror as he hammers something into place and leaves. Never buy a house built on a Friday is something Jacob said on a Friday as he walked away from a bad solder. The human race built on a Friday. That's what Genesis says. A book of the Bible I love, starring as it does an expert working at a speed that may invite disaster. When we work that fast, I think, my God, I sure feel sorry for whoever buys that house. And I think of Jacob saying it is good. This is called Working Late. I like the light, the way in winter it is gone, when we knock off. In summer, how it's soft. I like how hard it is to lift my arms above my head when I stand by the truck and swap out my wet shirt for a clean one. Antonio, my boss, is one of 5. Santos, Chayo, Jose, Rafa, him. 5 brothers, all plumbers at our shop. And if one works late, the other brothers sometimes go and help. And once, after we worked late to help Jose, his helper came through the house as we were finishing and handed us each a glass bottle of ice-cold tamarindo. There is a curtain separating work and pleasure. When you stay on a job site after 6, you start to see the men for whom that curtain's drawn, sitting on a framed-up set of stairs drinking Modelo's, not moving when you squeeze past with your tools. In the summer, I have spoken of the light, the way it softens till it separates from its appointed hours, so that staggering out of a house we've done, we'll sometimes place bets on what time it is, and sometimes I will miss it by 2 hours. In wintertime, the light will go so fast that when we drive away, we'll see the framers building fires out of little 2x scraps. There is a curtain between business class and first, and I have seen it rent, the tongues of flames of 2x6s licking at its hem. Jacob used to say it was for warmth when we'd work late and see the framers' fires. But when you're cold, the fire holds you close. The framers are much looser with their fires, hanging around, kicking a beer can back and forth in the very edge of its light, as if the fire's gravity was something they had chosen and could leave. I felt really bad about this poem that I wrote about Jacob, my boss, called Slop, and so I wrote him an apology, and this is it. It's Dear Jacob. Dear Jacob, I am sorry that I always called you Whitey, the nickname that they gave to you in roughs, and never Jake, the nickname that you tried to make catch on. It never did. For that, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry that in talking to my friends about you, what I hammered on was your astonishing capacity for slop, how you would drop an elbow wet with glue into the dirt and then just pick it up and glue it on, just dirt and all. I could go on, but I'm trying to quit, Jacob. I'm trying to be better. I'm sorry, but sometimes I think about the things that we have done in those little 2-bath tract homes out in Hutto, Round Rock, Georgetown, Manor, Hornsby Bend, and I want to say, Jesus, there's people living there with that plumbing we were always sprinting through. I'm sorry. Let me just say the kindness that I built this poem for and then get out before I make things any worse. You love to travel. I believe you love your wife. You never spoke of women that we passed in the truck. You never raised your voice to me. You said, when I came back after quitting and trying a job I couldn't hold, I guess you want to go back to that donut shop. And then you took me to the place I loved, paid for my meal, and never spoke of my defection or the fact that I had failed. In general, you spoke about a lot of things and rarely asked me questions, which, thank you, but both because you let me hide myself when I was scared and also because I really did like hearing of your love of art, of trains, of cities, your mixed feelings about camping, which you described at length, especially the campfire, when everyone goes to their tents except for you. And you said that the Psalm said that David said that he mused by the fire. You said that line a couple times, mused by the fire. And you said, that's what I do. I sit there and I muse by the fire. I'm sorry I've depicted you as always in a hurry. That is mostly what I want to say. It was not, as I've implied, that because you like to hurry, you thought nothing was holy. I know some things were holy, as I have said, your wife. As I have said, the couple burning words that you believe are marks of where God shot into the world. I worked with you when I thought I'd be transfigured by my job, and you did not. You rushed through work to meet your wife at the travel agent, to hear her tell you about Rome, the chapel so dark and full of art that they seem lit by what is made. I got 3 more poems, and this one is called Cave Paintings in the Porta-Can. I don't know if any of you guys have ever used a job site toilet. I hope that none of you ever have. But this is just a work of archaeology. Cave Paintings in the Porta-Can. Welcome to the Obama Presidential Library is scrawled in Sharpied letters on the back wall of a shitter I keep using by mistake outside a row of houses whose commodes we're putting in. I prefer the work of the evangelist who's carved with a box cutter, weed saves lives, and a panicked script. Mostly it is dicks of every proportion and size, almost all with testicles, small and nervous on the shaft. Sometimes one shitter will have 7 dicks scrawled at different angles and altitudes. Once I even saw where someone drew improbably a seagull, which a palimpsest of later hands had turned into a dick. But nothing is as strange as the women that are drawn in many hands, in the fat crawl of a framer's pencil and blade or flathead driver. They all start at the vulva, then work outward as if drawn by a memory that there's more to be drawn. The detail goes the farther out it goes until the arms and legs are tapered into spikes. When I say privacy, I mean what we are like when we're with people who are just like us. A job site's very private for a man. It's pretty much just us. By privacy, I mean whatever makes a man feel so expansive in a shitter with a pen that he wants to tell you what he knows. What's said sometimes in private on the job is so scary to me that when a privacy is tender, even a small one, I hold it like a rosary. What I mean is I watched Shorty do his paperwork in the truck, and he kept fucking up a word until he said, "Why don't you just write the thing?" and handed me the pen, warm from his hand, and watched me write the word over his glasses and said, "Yes," and took the paper back. Of course, writing the thing, I see how small it is. And even with Shorty, who I love, sometimes he will say shit that makes me be like, what? Shit that makes me realize that when Shorty goes home, man, I just have no idea. I don't even know Shorty's name. This is a poem about the building trades. It's about it's mostly about my mom, and it's about an encounter I had with the building trades. It's called Telephone Crew. Because the trees outside my mother's cabin were so thick, the way she got the telephone was for an archer to come with the crew of diggers who set the high poles and climb and shoot an arrow tied to high gauge fishing line above the trees and use that line to string the cable to her house. It was the archer who came back later that night, heaving his whole body at her door, saying, "Come on, let me in." And she said no. Once, my mother rolled her eyes at Allen Ginsberg from the front row of his classroom at Naropa. Once, my mother was surprised by a copperhead in the outhouse when she was pregnant with my sister, so she took up a hoe and cut the snake in half, and then she did what she came in there for. She had a .22 and bullets and an oil lamp and a cabin that was wired for a phone. And she could hear the archer walk around the house. Like many women who survived until her age, my mother has a history which gives her trouble with her memories. And someday, in the next 5 years, if I want to see my mother, I'll no longer be allowed to be her son. I will stand at her door knocking as a man. I never had to be a stranger when I was with my mother. I won't be allowed to be a stranger then. And this last poem is The Old Ways. And just before I read this one, I just want to say what a treat it is to be able to read with Logos. I love these readings so much. And when Travis had mentioned to me that I could come and read with them, and but we hadn't set a date, and then he mentioned that Tiana was going to come and read, and I was like, Travis, please let me read with Tiana. He's like, okay, and I'm really, really grateful that I did. It's just such a joy to be sharing this reading with Tiana, who is such a wonderful writer and a wonderful friend, and you guys are in for a real treat. I don't know that there's any writer who I'm reading right now who is as generous and as wild with their intelligence. I feel like in a Tiana Clark poem, I get to follow the most interesting mind in America, and yeah, you guys are in for a real treat. This poem is called The Old Ways. The only time that we aren't sprinting is when we have to water test a house, to stick a hose into a bathtub and just wait. Luis Gerardo hates it, hates the waiting. Doing nothing makes him nervous. Doing nothing is the only thing we do that I am better at than him. Water testing is my favorite thing we do. Sometimes we talk about our lives or ask each other questions which we otherwise would not. During a water test, Luis Gerardo told me his last girlfriend is married now and that he doesn't mind, but wishes everyone would stop telling him every time she posts about her pregnancy online. Sometimes we wash our hands in the still water of the tub and watch the dirt of a whole day unfurl above our palms, which moves me very much and makes me want to use the phrase "the old ways" to describe it. Squatting there feels ancient, the water so still we can watch what we remove. Even Tonio will talk when we are stopped. He told me yesterday his daughter wakes up in the middle of the night and will not sleep except when lying on his chest when he is moving, which, lucky for her, is always, even now, waiting for water, and only when I say, I couldn't do it. Does Tonio stop and watch what I have said hang in the stillness, and I watch it, and am still watching it when Tonio says, it's part of life, Jesse. Thanks, y'all. That's it. That's what I got. Really appreciate y'all being here.
Thank you so very much, Jesse. I am moved very much by your poems and feel very lucky to have heard them and glad to have your book to revisit them, and grateful for your work in them and outside of them. And now I have the great pleasure of introducing to you all our second reader this evening. Every time I loomed the deep, I became another person. Tiana Clark writes in The Rhyme of Nina Simone, a work that is part persona poem, part ghostly dialogue, part fantasia on the music and madness of America. It is the magisterial centerpiece of Clark's 2018 debut full-length collection, I Can't Talk About the Trees Without the Blood. Simone graces the book's cover in the form of Terence Hayes' gorgeous, startling painting, I Think I'm a Nina Simone, and comprises the subject of an entrancing profile Clark published in the Oxford American, Nina is Everywhere I Go. To loom is to occupy significant territory, whether meteorological, picture looming clouds, or spiritual, think of Rilke's Terrifying Angels. A loom is also the instrument that weaves fabric together, so surely Simone and the Southern United States loomed the depths of Clark's imagination, culling and calling forth poems that are candid and incantatory, formally adroit and emotionally agile. Who said it? She asks again and again in Nashville, the opening poem of I Can't Talk About the Trees. The speaker is attempting to locate the individual who heckled her husband for being her husband. But more so, she is trying to trace the origins of America's slander, its sleazy, racist, white supremacist tongue. There is always a word I am chasing inside and outside of my body, Clark confesses. This relentless pursuit of words and their roots and their words characterizes the poems that Clark has published since I Can't Talk About the Trees. I never find exactly what it is that I'm looking for because there is no category for my type of desire, she writes in I Masturbate, Then Pray to God. In the last poem you will hear from Clark this evening, I Stare at a Cormorant, published recently in The Atlantic, the titular bird is evocative and evanescent, a source of revelation that vanishes. I'm still thinking about the cormorant who disappeared when I was writing this poem. I was just looking down and finishing a line, and then I look back up, gone. We are so fortunate that tonight Clark is not gone, but here with us. Tiana Clark is the winner of the 2020 Kate Tufts Discovery Award, the 2019 National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellow, and the 2015 Rattle Poetry Prize. She is a recipient of the 2021-2022 Amy Lowell Poetry Traveling Scholarship and the 2019 Pushcart Prize. Clark was the 2017-2018 J.C. and Ruth Hall's Poetry Fellow at the Wisconsin Institute of Creative Writing and is now the Grace Hazard Conkling Writer in Residence at Smith College. Her poem, First Date During Social Distance, appears in this week's issue of The New Yorker. In it, she writes, and writes again, everything wanted to be touched. And Clark's work is infused with both yearning and touching, fulfillment and desire. Friends, please welcome Tiana Clark.
Jason, thank you so much for that beautiful and super generous introduction. I really appreciate you just bringing in Nina, and I loved everything that you said, and thank you. I really appreciate your kindness and generosity. Thank you, Travis, for curating this beautiful night. And thank you all for coming. There's so much Zoom burnout and fatigue and so many Zoom events all day. So to tune in on a Tuesday night, I really appreciate it. And Jesse, that was amazing. I haven't heard you read in so long, and I missed hearing your reading voice. Jesse and I went to grad school together, and we had so much fun. And I haven't seen him in a long time, so it's just so fun to be here with him. And we would often look at each other in workshop and just have this like knowing kind of gaze with each other when something funny would happen, or we didn't know what was going on, or when something wild would happen in workshop, Jesse would be the first space I would go to for our kind of nonverbal dialogue. So I love that we're just continuing that over Zoom. I actually wasn't going to read this poem tonight, but when I was talking to Travis earlier, he said one of the first poems that he read for me was my poem that appeared in poetry. My therapist wants to know about my relationship to work. So I thought I'd open with that in honor of you, Travis. And also thinking about Logos being this idea of rituals and this idea of the rituals that you're doing tonight. This poem is kind of filled with rituals. Obviously a different rhythm before the pandemic, but something I've been thinking about lately is how to take care of myself. And this poem was kind of a first conversation that I had with that. My therapist wants to know about my relationship to work. I hustle upstream, I grasp, I grind, I control and panic, poke balloons in my chest, always popping there. Always my thoughts thump, thump, I snooze, wake and go boom all day like this. I short my breath, I scroll and scroll. I see what you wrote, I like, I heart, my thumb so tired, my head bent down but not in prayer. Heavy from the looking. I see your face, your phone-lit faces. I tap your food 2 times for more hearts. I retreat, I email yes, yes, yes. Then I cry, I need to say no, no, no. Why does it take so long to reply? I FOMO and shout, I read, I never enough. New book, new post, new ping, a new tab, then another. Papers on the floor, scattered and stacked, so many journals, unbroken white spines, waiting. Did you hear that new? I start to text back, ellipsis, then I forget. I balk, I lazy the bed, I wallow when I write, I truth when I lie. I throw a book when a poem undoes me. I underline Clifton, today we are possible. I start from image, I begin with Phyllis Sweetly, I begin with Phyllis Sweetly reaching for coal. I start with a napkin, receipt, or my hand. I muscle the memory, I stutter the page, I fail, hit delete, scratch out one more line. I sonnet, then break form. I make tea, use 2 bags. Boss again. I bathe now, Epsom salt, no books or phone, just water and the sound of water filling. Glory be my buoyant body, bowl of me. Yes, lavender, more bubbles and bath bomb, of course, some candles too. All alone with Coltrane, my favorite Naima, for his wife, now for me, inside my own womb. Again, I child back, I float, I sing, I simple and humble. Eyes closed, I lower my voice. Is it a psalm? Don't know, but I stopped. I'm going to read a longer poem tonight. This is called Indeed Hotter for Me Are the Joys of the Lord. I thought I'd read some God poems since it seems to be the theme of the night. But of course, a God poem for me is a little bit different. You'll see. I started writing longer poems after 2016. And I was talking earlier to Travis about Roger Reeves, and it was after I listened to Roger on a podcast called Commonplace, where he was saying that he found himself subconsciously stepping out of the way of white women. He's an African-American poet. And he wanted to interrogate that impulse and whether or not he was doing that on the page. And when he said that, I was driving and I actually had to pull over. And I was asking myself, where was I becoming small in my own life, even down to the line? And so I was interested in chasing a type of breathlessness and chasing a type of borderlessness in my work. And so I didn't want to stop myself, and I wanted to kind of contain a type of lyric swagger in this poem. So these longer poems kind of came out. Indeed, hotter for me are the joys of the Lord. And it's after The Seafarer and Gabrielle Calvacaresi. I can make a true song about my body a ship, my body a map, thumbtacked with shame, Who has the audacity to take up this much space? I can make a long poem too and not say sorry for me, myself. I carry myself like an excuse. I carry myself constellated with worries. I say sorry for me, myself. I carry my borders like a burden. I carry the borders of my body like a burdened beast. But how often have I endured the storm-driven words of long-winded white men, hot about my heart, my house slave heat? My mighty thighs burst cobalt, and they're reaching and reaching without completion. Me, myself, always on the rim of coming and not coming. A poem hurts like that, doesn't it? A familiar frustration, all that grunting and grinding and saying nothing after the peak animal sounds. But a body has to spill, right? So I took the pleasure as myself and touched myself there. Can I call that God? Can I perhaps want that more than God? Does God still want me when I don't want God? Does God still want me when I succumb to other gods? Does God still know my name? Does God still know my name when I'm wet and worn from all that nasty shame? Unzipped by desires I'm not ready to name. Last night I couldn't sleep. So I raised my hands, another kind of reaching. I whispered, take this tight sea out of the bog in my breast, my spirit out in the rigid waterways. The rapid river lifts for a moment, and for a moment I'm freer. But it all cascades, everything ricochets back inside me, inside my wonky mud drum of a body, booming a thick morass of want. But can't that be a type of worship too, on my knees like a sub, my mouth gagged with a pink ball of poems, getting what I want and then losing it, begging for what I need but never getting it? If my body be a long poem, then I want it to go wherever it needs. I lick dirty verbs in my teeth and feast. I go back to the buffet with my dirty plate because I want my body to say all it has to say and not be sorry for the saying of it. I want the long poem of my body to not apologize for the space it needs to make and make up. I want to relax inside a long poem and not feel shame. Who do you think you are? I repeat. I am what the long poem says about me. I am the seafarer, hotter about the Lord, cold yet searing with unmet pleasure and exile, elemental in my suffering. I want to stop the repetition that says I'm shit, I'm ugly, I'm shit, I'm nothing, I want to stop that wrist from erasing my blackety black breast. I want to stop my gratitude from being made a weapon formed against me. And I want this all from the not sorry long poem. And I want that giant, luscious, deep wanting to never stop in me. I want me to not stop me. Lord, please don't stop. Don't stop. Get it, get it. Who do you think you are without shame enough? My body a pool of pleasures and my own pleasure first. I'm done with lying there, clenching from pain, taking pain, absorbing another person's pain and calling that pleasure. My body a ship, my body be a long poem, my body without shame, without shame, without shame. G tells us to draw a map of how we got here. G says start anywhere. G says make a boat out of paper. G reads a long poem called The Seafarer while we make the little paper boats. Little scratches, soft music, scrapes, from all the folding and tucking and folding, little vessels, little selves of ourselves. G wants to walk us down to the lip of fresh water and burn the boats, but Lake Mendota is frozen over. G wants to know about the engines inside long poems. G has a sound and a symbol. I want a sound and a symbol, but I'm not ready. I'm not ready to say what I've always wanted. I'm not ready to point at what I so achingly desire from my body or a lover, because it is also what I fear most about me is myself. I'm not ready to know what that might mean. I might just need a longer voyage in this queer body shaking as it's being named, called forth and created for my years of silence, my years frozen as a little girl who wasn't allowed to desire other girls. I'm choosing to mourn and celebrate her here in this long poem that is my body on the brink, but I still want joy at the end. I still want to risk joy at the end. I still want the repetition of joy at the end, and God at the end is my joy, and my body maximal joy, and G is joy, and G makes a praise house for all of us, and all of us are welcome there. This is where we have our homes now. Follow me thither and find belonging in our joy. Look how much grief and gratitude is found in our new city. My God, what wholeness. G says what a lucky sack of stars we are. Let there be thanks to G and God at the end. At the end, I want my sound and symbol to be loosened from snow, Mary Ruefle's snow to be exact. Her long poem tumbles after sex and death and birds and mostly death, but the poem about sex is mostly about departure. I want to start and end from water. I took my boat to the frozen lake anyway. I did the ceremony with my bones, bread, and blood. I laid my questing boat body down on the ice. My long comb is burning. I set it on fire with my belly. I blew my breath for the blaze to rise. I said nothing to my vessel. I said nothing to my vessel. I said nothing for the rest of the day. I said my body dipping in the distance, I skidding through a veil of white static. I watched until the snow held the body completely. I watched till I was complete. I watched till I was gone. I have to take a sip after that. Also, someone has they're not muted. So if y'all can please make sure you're muted. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Just thank you. Okay, so that's how I write a God poem. I'm gonna pull from my chapbook, Equilibrium. Magic. I grew up in a charismatic church, very different from an Episcopalian church. Travis. Magic. Light as a feather, stiff as a board. Light as a feather, stiff as a board. We chanted as children. We believed we could levitate bodies with our words. Like in my church, when the preacher placed charismatic fire in the palm of his hands to the crucible of our foreheads, he would shout, Jesus. Blow peppermint-scented breath of spirit on each face. The huddled congregation fell like drunken dominoes around the altar, wriggling on the swivel of spiritual intoxication. They called it slain in the spirit, consumed by divine ecstasy. I wanted to be the next ember, feel the singe from God all over my body, except when the preacher laid his hands on me, I felt nothing, only the dry heat of his dragon mouth. I wanted to believe their version of Jesus wouldn't skip me, so when he tried again, pushing me to a slant, I gave in. Lying on the carpet, encircled by hysterical laughter and blissed out faces, I cried. I was pretending. Same with the child chants. Bloody Mary was never in the mirror and the Ouija boards. I felt nothing. Just fingers guiding towards letters with no message for me. How we fake to feel the magic inside of us. It took me a while to understand that I didn't have to beg for it. God was already washing the dust off my feet. Okay. I'm going to read one from my book, I Can't Talk About the Truth Without the Blood. So this poem, I was in a class with Jesse where we were studying Elizabeth Bishop, and I think we have read The Moose, so we had to do a response poem to it. And so I think this is also my attempt to write an animal poem, which just got into a weird sexual, psychological God landscape again. So here we go, Cottonmouth. The man's mouth unhinged. He said, I broke my jaw and it opens like this now. I heard the wet click of little bones unfastening. I woke up before anyone else and walked outside barefoot to the chilled porch still slick with a thin layer of morning dew. There was a little coral snake asleep, coiled by a rocking chair. I wasn't afraid this time. We were told the snake was the most beautiful thing God created until the snake wanted to be God or like a God or godlike. I'm not sure now. It happened again, the same dream. I've seen 3 women give birth, and with each contraction, the mighty hips break and stretch, the leathery mouth of the snake. I watch as they writhe inside the all-consuming pain, pure as God, fists clenched, wailing something not quite human, but animal enough. Once she dreamt she swallowed a snake till she became the snake, looping, legless reptile, thick and aching. She woke up paralyzed until she shouted, Jesus, her arms grasping the invisible beast, blocking the dark. The guy with the broken mouth baptized me once inside a Pentecostal church. He said I had to be fully immersed for it to count for heaven, you know? He said Jesus' name only, not Trinity, just Jesus. Then he touched me under the water, plucked and dripping. I came to the surface and I shouted and they shouted and everyone's mouth opened in praise. The snake hisses like a married man, measured and slow. You better get out of my car. In a way that meant devour, swallowed me whole. Crystalline sweat stippled across his forehead, his eyes feral and glinting like 2 tiger-eyed gemstones. The street glazed with vulgar light. I felt so vulnerable when the tiny metals unlatched from my seatbelt, breaking jangled air with delicious clatter. I was a good girl that night, he later said. Lateral undulation, we swam in the river until we saw a snake muscling the skin of the water with many ripples, making waves and circles. They shall lick the dust like a serpent, like a crawling thing of the earth, the broken jaw, 8 centimeters now, push, push. All I remember about my grandmother is her poof of white hair dolloped in her coffin, a cloudy cotton ball. I snatched the silver snakes out of my black wool hair, a juicy Medusa. Still, I can't wait to be like her. Am I being eaten or eating? Who can say, really? So the dream goes something like this. A snake slithered between my legs, poured out of my mouth, one long continuous loop, glossy, glittering scales, voluminous muscle, elongated might, becoming Ouroboros, my body a circle, becoming samsara, entering and exiting the holy, holy O at the center of my deepening meat. To creep, to crawl, I crawl. My mother licks the floor with her feet. I bite John Berryman's tail and Henry runs out of his mouth. I crawl inside John Berryman's mouth and manumit Henry. Now Henry is free. Henry, you don't have to talk like that anymore. What if he wanted to leave his wife and found another keeled and granular body? His belly travels like a snake. She believes her father is also a snake. I have so many dark scars and purple bruises on my legs. I have my mother's knees crunchy and difficult. Everything hurts when I'm about to go to sleep. The snake is ready for me. Every time she passes this one motel, she shivers at the things she did with her body to the man with the mouth of the snake. All his holy, masculine fire consuming her whole, she was taken. After he prayed for forgiveness, not from her, but from God, to make him able and clean again. She's always in that room on the bed, naked like prey. I've got two fangs in my mouth that could pierce you. My crossbite never ground down my teeth. I used to bite myself in my sleep. It never drew blood. I gave birth to myself and held myself there. And for my last poem, I'm going to read I Stare at a Cormorant. Thank you all so much. I'm so excited to talk with Jesse, and all praise the bird poem. I stare at a cormorant with its water-logged wings spread open, drying off on a rock in the middle of a man-made lake after diving for food. And it makes me think about wonder, and it makes me want to pry and stretch my shy arms open to the subtle summer wind slicing through the park, sliding over my skin like a stream of people blowing candles out over my feathery body. And it makes me think about my church when I was a kid and how I lifted my hands to Jesus, hoping for surrender, but often felt nothing, except for the rush of fervent people wanting to be delivered from their aching present pain, and how that ache changed the smell in the room to money, and how I pinched my face, especially my eyes tighter, and reached my hands higher, how I, like the cormorant, stood in the middle of the sanctuary, so exposed and open, and wanted so much to grasp the electric weather rushing through the drama of it all, like a shout in the believer's scratchy throat. I don't go to church anymore. But today I woke up early and meditated. I closed my eyes and focused on a fake seed in my hand and put my hands over my heart to shove the intention inside my chest to blossom. I'm still stumbling through this life hoping for anyone or something to save me. I'm still thinking about the cormorant who disappeared when I was writing this poem. I was just looking down and finishing a line, and then I looked back up, gone. Thank you.
I'm just going to go ahead and unmute myself and applaud wildly on behalf of all of us. Tiana, thank you so very much. I can't remember a Logos reading where I just almost forgot to do the slides and to handle all the production here. That was just absolutely transcendent and grounding at the same time. I mean, this book has been so important to me, and just those little moments of manumitting Henry, I just loved hearing that again. There's just so much tenderness and so much fierceness and so much truth. And thank you so much for blessing us with that reading. And Jesse, likewise, thank you so much for opening us up so gloriously. And just does feel like the heart's really open right now. And it's such a joy to have a chance to have some conversation with you both. And typically, if we were gathered at Lazarus Brewing Company, you'd all have the order of service of the program in your hands, printed on a piece of paper. And you'd also have Tiana and Jesse's final poems printed for you to then take some time and discuss at tables with your new friends seated around you, and have some convivial conversation conversation. And these might be some questions you'd consider: which elements in these poems moved you? And then kind of the stylistic question: how did the language help create the emotional or other experience you had hearing or reading the poem? And then because I'm a preacher in my day job, I always have to ask, what might this poem be inviting you to consider or live into in the context of your own life? So you can ponder those questions perhaps, and maybe think of a few of your own to ask our poets. And Jason and I will just open up a little bit of curated conversation. And if we have some time, we can add some other voices to the conversation. But I suppose that was the one word that kept resonating internally for me as I began immersing myself in both of your bodies of work again, and preparing some questions or thoughts for this conversation. That question of voice, it comes through so clearly and uniquely and singularly in both your bodies of work. And so I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the crafting of voice, of the channeling of voice. And Tiana, in one of the interviews I was listening to in preparation, you cited our homegirl here in Texas, Brene Brown, who's a wonderful social science researcher at the University of Houston and has been a professor here at UT and is also an Episcopalian. And you reference her particularly on vulnerability, which I mean is a word that kind of means to be woundable, but also an ability to be seen. And I just kind of wonder about how both you, Tiana, and you, Jesse, might conceive of or consider the question of sort of the role of the self within your poem as a witness to what you've sort of learned, or as sort of an explorer as you write your lines and sort of adventure toward discovering a new truth. I wonder if that happens for you. So just a very rambling, open-ended, exuberant question about your thoughts on voice and maybe how you craft or bring a voice into to being in your writing.
Jesse, you want to go first or me?
Either way, Paul. I can jump in. You can if you want to percolate on it, or
You start.
all right. Yeah, I really love that both. I really like that that voice and being seen are in that question, because for me those do feel very tied together. I think that like a big part of my project, like just personally as a writer, is trying to sound in a poem like I sound in real life, or like how I imagine myself to sound in real life, like how I sound in my head. And like I think that voice, that like the way things are said, is the way that it's most important to me to be seen. And I feel like that's the way in which I like genuineness is most important to me. I haven't struggled to be present as a character in poems, but just in terms of voice, kind of that's where I see myself present in the poems. I don't know, Tiana, does that make sense to you, or what do you think? What do you think about it?
I too like that kind of correlation between voice and being seen. And I love some Brene Brown, some Daring Greatly, some Braving the Wilderness. So I think for me, thinking about a lot of Brene Brown works hovers around the idea of shame, right? And this idea that shame tells us not to tell our stories, but it's actually in sharing our scars and sharing our vulnerability where real community is built. And that's why I go to literature, to feel less alone in the world. I go to literature to have those little moments of like, oh wait, someone else feels that, or someone else has described this, concretizes an abstraction that and gives language to something that makes me feel seen. And so for my work, I grew up with a hippie poet named Bill Brown at Hume Fogg High School, and he always pushed us to go to the extreme personal, and then that's always your way to the universal. It wasn't the other way around. And if any of you are teachers, you know that the first thing that students do is they always start with like love, hate, fear, anger. But how do you zoom in to the very, very specific? And I think that's where I developed my voice, is again going back to those kind of like communion of scars and sharing from my personal, going into the wound to find a type of healing through the poems. Has been a way that I've kind of developed my voice, or whatever I think of voice is. Sometimes when people talk about voice in poetry, I still don't know exactly what we're talking about. I've just tried to be as honest as I possibly could in my life. I think there was an early way that I bared a little bit too much in my life. And so right now I'm trying to negotiate that type of opacity in my work of how do I take care of myself and also still bear witness to the truth, especially when it comes to like racial justice. So those are questions I carry with me often, but it's such a beautiful question. And I appreciate you asking it, Travis.
Wait, Tiana, can I just say, I think it's interesting that you said that like, you like the thing about voice, saying like, I don't even know what does voice even mean? Just because like, for me, like it is, your poems like do sound so much like yourself. I was thinking about that today. It's like, I really feel like that is like one thing that I love so much about you, especially like the stuff that you're writing like now, you know, those newer, like longer poems you talked about with that Roger Reeves thing. It's like, I really do feel like those poems sound like, I'm like, that's Tiana, which is so fun.
Yeah, I'm trying to be more of myself, I think, on the page. And I think that's the hardest task, right? Like, how do you, like, sometimes I'm just trying to even match the unbravery in my poems, right? Like, I feel like sometimes you can be braver in a poem than you can in real life. Do you ever feel that way?
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, because like in some ways, like because you're like, you can trick yourself, or I like trick myself that I'm like just working on craft. It's like, oh, I just like want to get this line right. Like, maybe I can put a break here or something. And I like can kind of like take my eye off the ball and actually say something that I would be scared to say in real life, because I'm like, oh, well, that's whatever. Like the important thing is like getting the sound of it, and I can kind of sneak a lot of stuff past myself.
I like it when the slippages happen, though, like in the psyche, or the psyche gets messy and you reveal something to yourself, like you're like, oh shit, I didn't know that I was feeling that, you know?
Yeah.
I like to keep that messiness in the poem, as you can see.
Yeah. So I'm so curious about, I mean, talking about being able to sort of be braver on the page than in real life in some ways. I mean, are there ways that you both kind of have developed practices to cultivate that kind of bravery? I mean, Jesse, you kind of mentioned it's focusing on craft and then seeing if your subconscious sort of surprises you or ekes or forces its way through in some way. But I mean, I've also, you know, maybe this is, I did want to ask you about craft, and you talk about your, I mean, this wonderful practice you've developed, your morning routine of the 3 M's. I think it's, was it meditation, movement, and morning pages. That's right, the Julia Cameron morning pages. And but you've talked as well about how sort of when you go walking, that's also writing. You're maybe composing lines in your head or thinking about the things you might write about. When you're reading, that's writing. When you're making a pie, maybe even, then that's writing. I mean, and I'm wondering, Jesse, if sort of plumbing is connected to your sense of craft as well. But I mean, are those ways of sort of cultivating that honesty just by like kind of living the life more fully and authentically?
I like Jason's comment in the chat. The 4th M is making pie.
Yeah, totally.
I think for me, a lot of the idea of embodiment, because I always say poems are bodies that remind us of our bodies. And so I think what you're talking about, these really embodied rituals that I've developed for myself, because I think for a long time I was really disconnected from my body. And I had to develop these practices because in grad school, and then when I first started teaching as a professor, and then my first book tour, all wonderful things, but I was a hot mess and was not taking care of myself and ended up in the ER. And as much as I love poetry and I love my work, like I have to find my worth outside of that, or I have to unstitch my productivity from my self-worth. And so I think for me, we focus so much on the process, especially in poetry, or that's what capitalism makes us think about. And so I wanted to go back to process. And so to me, I don't like to suffer on the page or self-flagellate, especially if you grew up in church, you're really good at that. And so for me, going for a walk or resting or giving myself permission to relax and experience life and not have to force, it's the same thing in church. Like I remember when I was growing up, I'd always be like, God was in heaven with like a Nerf gun if I sinned or I screwed up. And I think that carried over into my writing life.
Yeah.
And so it's just grace. I gave myself a lot of grace. And so that's why there's so many times where if I'm stuck in a poem, I let that ferment in darkness. And there's so many times I've been on a walk where a line will come to me, or I'll look at a bird, or something, and I'll get my picture of this app and I'll be like, oh, Japanese blood maple. Those are great sounding name. I'm going to put that in my notes app. And then, go back or I get like shifted or jolted in some way, or I'm just paying attention to the world, and where I'm not just beating myself at blinking cursor and being like, everything has to be fire, everything has to be great. And I'm just trying to unstitch that for myself, just number one, for my own survival outside of poetry, but to have a different relationship to ritual within myself, to truly take care of myself. And it's made me a better person and a better writer and a better professor to do that. Jesse?
No, that's great. I really like that. I feel like I'm it sounds really good. I'm into it, man. I like those. I like those. Yeah. No, I mean, I feel like for me, like, I don't remember what the question is, where the question was, but I'm just like thinking about like Tiana's thing, and just like kind of like it makes me think about like, was the question about like rituals and routines?
Yeah, and like craft, and wonder if that connects with your work in plumbing as well.
Yeah, I mean, like thinking about like rituals and routines, like I don't have. I mean, like for me, like writing is like a very like the seasonal practice. You know, it's like it's as opposed to like a daily one. Which I would not like. I don't think is like how you're supposed to do it. But you know,
Lucy Brock Broido apparently used to only write poems in like October when it was raining, and she was in her apartment in Cambridge, and it worked out for her. So
yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's and definitely for me, you know, like I mean, these poems, like I wrote this like manuscript kind of over the course of like a year, and you know, just like working with different over the course of like a year and a half. I came to plumbing very late in life, and I was working with most people who were like in their 20s, and I'm 34, and I started like 3 years ago. Wait, say what?
Do you know how old you are?
I was a birthday in April, so I haven't like I'm still kind of adjusting. I'm in the low to mid 30s. Anyways, so I like had these poems that I wrote over like 18 months, and then I like submitted them as a manuscript, and then like, but after it had been submitted and accepted, I like read some poems that really impacted me very deeply, and I wanted to change it completely, and I did. I rewrote the whole manuscript, and there's a lot of poems I took out and put in and rewrote everything basically, and that was a very intense period of work where I was working every day on all these different poems, had them all in my head, and that was in December, and since then it's just been kind of plumbing, you know, and my like morning routine is getting from my bed to the truck by like 6:15. You know, that's like my morning routine. And
hashtag plumminate. That's the new hashtag.
Plumminate.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, I'm interested. It's like very inspiring for me to think, be like, oh yeah, routines. Yeah, I'm into it. I'm very into this. Thank you.
I will say this on routines. I remember in grad school, our professor Mark Jarman gave us an article from Kwame Dawes, and I think it was about revision or something. And the first line said, use whatever works.
Yeah.
Whatever's working for you, work it. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And I will say, like, I think that part of, like, as writers, like, as our profession is, like, to look over the fence at our neighbors. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what we do for a living. And I think that we are, are doing that in our poems. But for me, I'm also doing that in my life. And I'm always just like, oh, yeah, Tiana's got routines, and geez, I gotta get some of those routines, and like if I go to the next reading, somebody would be like, I don't like, like Lucy Brock Broido, like I read in October, I'll be like, geez, that's really how you should be doing it. I think that's like part of the.
You knew me in grad school. You and I were barely making it. You know what I mean? Like we were just getting by. So.
I mean, sometimes not even that.
Jesse, I'm curious, what were the poems you read that sort of impelled you to completely alter the manuscript? If you're willing to disclose.
Yeah, I read a poem in a magazine just by chance that happened to arrive, and it was I think it was called like I'm so sick of reading about poems about male suffering or something. And the book at that time was a book about male suffering. That is like what the book was about. And there's still definitely some of that in there. But I think that I just like, yeah, I just kind of thought, huh. And I like took a look at it and thought like, what if it was like a book about hope? Because like it is like a book, because it's a book about the building trades and about job sites. It is like a male book. There's a lot of dudes in there, and it can be hard to write a book about dudes and make it. And so that kind of became that was kind of the second go that I took at it, and that kind of project.
I know Jason's got some poems, but I just can't resist asking this or some questions. But he's got poems too.
I got poems too. Yeah, I just have 2 more poems.
Yeah, he's got some poems. But I can't. I love. I mean, Tiana, that point you made about sort of emphasizing process over kind of working toward this sort of capitalistic sort of affirmation or validation of your work. And so I'd love to hear if y'all be willing to share just a little bit about sort of what your kind of like why is when you're coming to the page. Like, do you feel like, are you working stuff out for yourself? Are you trying to express things, or do you have the idea of some reader in mind, whether that's, you know, a friend and sort of comrade in the poetry world, or whether that's a wider audience? I mean, especially as your kind of careers become more in the public eye, what are you kind of working toward or for when you sit down on the page?
I've always kind of said I'm writing to save my own life first. That might sound selfish or solipsistic, but I truly mean that. We had to trace our literary heritage in grad school. And I think for me, like tracing Black women's work all the way back to Phyllis Wheatley and thinking about the kind of survival that her life meant to even make it to the page. And what that means for me now is that writing for me, number one, is an act of survival. And then for me, it is writing to save my own life first. And I think that was a line that came out in my Nina Simone poem. And that poem is very much reckoning with how I got through grad school and defining my sense of poetics, defining what I was working for and also working against. And so for me, it's the Lucille Clifton, like I made it up here. There's an improvisation. And so sometimes there isn't a handbook. You don't know how to do this, or isn't a model. There still isn't that many Black women poets. Of course, we have Rita Dove, Natasha Trethewey, but they're compared to white poets. I mean, it's very few Black female poets that have been very successful and have showed the path of how to do this. And so for me, I very much feel that sense of improvisation and making up and holding, my one hand holding tight my other hand in that same poem. And so I think I look at my poetics, that sense of way of finding my own hands in the darkness, right? Like, Tony Hoagland says, reaching for metaphor is like that fetching motion or reaching your hand in a dark box. But I think for me, I'm reaching for myself to help myself. Yeah. And then if that happens to bring healing to other people, it's beautiful. That's always the hope. In those first initial drafts, I don't often think about audience. Audience comes for me. I mean, to me, it's that wild Lorca, Drende, Drentz draft, you hope to get. And then later in revision, I think about audience. Yeah. Major Jackson just had that new poem that came out recently on poets.org where he said, reader, I should have married you sooner. And I love that line because it made me think about this idea of why do we hold the reader at bay, and this idea of like maybe inviting them into that intimacy sooner. Those are some quick thoughts I have.
That's so great. What is that from, Tiana?
Let me begin again. It was a new poem that he just thinking of the poem a day on poets.org. It's Major Jackson's new poem. Yeah, there's just a lot. Reader, I should have married you sooner. I just love that line.
It's so good.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's so good. I think, I really like that. I think that is like a very meaningful, I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing it, but that is like a very meaningful, that's like a helpful lens for me in kind of thinking about that question. I think I've been really tickled by how many people who either work in the trades or who more people who like know somebody who work in the trades. It'll be like somebody like, like, oh, I read my brother one of the poems from this book, and he's a carpenter, and he said it was okay, and it's really great. Like, I really love that. It's just like, oh yeah, like, how can I write? Like, all right, and it's really like I've been surprised by how much pleasure I've gotten from that. I was pretty anxious about this book coming out, and have been really surprised by how how nice it feels to have somebody read a poem that I wrote and like it. It feels really good.
That's beautiful. I'm going to mute myself before I ask another question.
Jesse, I don't just like these poems, I love them. And I couldn't help but think of one of my mentors, Philip Levine, reading your work. There's obviously the sort of the presentation of work in the poems, but then also the, I think of that great moment in Phil's poem, What Work Is, where the acknowledgement that work is emotional, that it is that vulnerability, as well as the kind of physical labor that our lives consist of. And I think that is characteristic in both your work and in Tiana's work, that emotional labor that's happening to kind of come to terms with the self. And also you used the language, Tiana, earlier of embodiment, and I think both of your poems feel so lived in to me. And so I'm curious, one, kind of how you work through a poem, both kind of maybe the drafting process, if how many revisions typically you go through in a typical poem, if there is a typical poem, and then sort of how you get to the final product, or how you kind of recognize, okay, I've done the work, it's here.
Yeah, I think for me, every poem is so different, that process. I mean, some poems come through me like lightning. Like, we love it when that happens, when we have a poem kind of throttle you and kind of comes out almost fully formed. I love it when those happen. Of course, I do the full work of revision on that poem, but oftentimes it goes back to that original form. The other ones take time. I think my rhyme unit when I started in grad school, but it took me 2 years to edit that one, because it was like, that one was like hog tying a pig, and I've never done it. Jesse probably has, I don't know, but that one took a very long time, because I was in a larger poem. I'm plating and braiding and wrestling these major themes, and I also wanted to get Nina's voice right in that poem, and I was playing a lot with aesthetics, and that, like, the speaker's voice would be on the left margin, she would be kind of wavering. And that was a poem I took to several different conferences and had several different talks with with Robert Hass and Carl Phillips, giving me really great feedback. I mean, Carl Phillips confronted me about Nina and said, I don't think Nina would be talking to you like this or saying these. I changed a lot of the dialogue based on my conversation with her. I mean, for me, revision is where the real glorious, hard, beautiful, frustrating process is. And so my process, I usually write everything, and then I copy and paste and push down so that everything's in one document. So I often tell my students that a lot of my documents or one poem can be anywhere from 50 to 100, 150 pages. And they're like, what? But I'm keeping everything, because sometimes you can edit the soul of something. And so I want to scoot back and see where I might have lost it. Sometimes that process is faster. And then I also print out my work. I read it out loud. The oral process is really, really important to me. I know it's to Jesse as well. And like, sometimes I can hear that stickiness in the syntax when I record myself, and I can hear back, or I might break my line off my breath. But again, I think each poem, if anything, I'm trying to get my ego out of the way and let the poem reveal itself. And so that process can look so different with every type of poem. And if anything, I'm what is this poem wanting from me, is what I'm trying to do. So I try to be obedient to that process and be really patient. But sometimes I don't write every day, but I'm a real magpie, and I just kind of collect and collect and collect and collect. And then I have like a deluge. When that deluge happens, I try to just be obedient to that flood. And so, where someone says like, oh, I write, fiction, like I do 1,000 or 2,000 words a day or whatever. I might be taking notes every day. I'm always taking notes, voice memos, and reading a lot. And then I might have a day where like I've just flattened my whole Sunday to just chase this thing. And that's how I kind of work that process out, where I'm just like, I want to get that poem done until it doesn't surprise me anymore. There's no more surprises. I've worked out everything. And I always tell my students, and it's from Donald Hall, I say that you should have a reason for every line break, every comma, every punctuation, the form, the aesthetics, the title. I'm going through all of those decisions because someone's going to ask you about that, and you should have a reason for it. You should not look at me and say, I don't know. And so I go through those same considerations myself in my own work.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with the thing about like the kind of letting stuff accrue and then like until it kind of you got something. You know, for me, like I'll get something will happen to me, or I'll hear something, or I'll see something, and I'll realize that it's something that has gravity, and it's going to start pulling other things toward it. And I kind of have to just like hold on to that thing until the stuff gets pulled toward it that it needs to make it a poem. Usually this like at least like 2 or 3 different things that just for whatever reason stick together in my head. You know, I'm just like carrying some around, and I'm like picking up other experiences and other things, kind of being like, does these fit together? No, these fit together. And then when I kind of got the frame of it, these like 2 or 3 things that go together, then, you know, like kind of says, obviously it's not a typical deal, but like it takes forever. You know, even from that point for me, like to get it, there's a bunch of poems in this book that like, I mean, you know, like that I'm still working on. Yeah, I mean, just like the one in particular, Working Late, is a poem in the book that like I almost didn't read the last couple of stanzas of, because like I don't, it's just like not right for me. I'm just like, that's not it. And they're like there kind of like because I had to put out the book, so I like had them there and I just like stuck them on there. But it's not. I don't think that's really how it ends. So yeah, still working.
I love that. I've heard so many poets talk about like revising their books, like, you know, taking a printed book and being like, no, I'm going to change these lines. Well, we would love to continue asking you questions and basking in your luminous responses, but we're going to switch into the next portion, which is an opportunity to encourage our audience to support your work, to buy these poems.
A quick moment, Jason. There's an important question. There's an important question in the chat that I think Jesse should answer.
No, so I was invited to have the opportunity to hog tie a pig just like 2 weeks ago, and I passed it up. I think I was plumbing. I was like repiping a house, and so I couldn't go and hog tie this pig.
Yeah, I sensed that in my spirit, and I knew that wouldn't be off the mark for you.
No, it was very close. It was very close, and I just, Kirk, if you're watching, I'm really sorry. I hope you're okay. I hope that, you know.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jason. It was that was a hot question.
No, that was a worthy interruption.
Yeah. Thank you, and I'm sorry. Yeah.
Pig tying at Round Top, I think, is it's going to be the next big thing.
Yeah, that's the next big thing.
Well, I feel like we're both hogtied by y'all's brilliance, and I didn't realize how we'd already gone significantly over time, as engrossed as we are in this conversation. And I feel like we could kind of keep it going all night, but we definitely do want to respect both y'all's time. You've been so generous with your readings and with your responses, and we wanted to give folks an opportunity to be generous toward your art and supporting your work in return. And so tonight we're so blessed as always to have Susan Post with us here on the call, the owner of, hi Susan, of Bookwoman Austin, which is Austin's premier feminist bookstore. And not only is Susan the curator of book sales for these virtual events, but also has had a long and historical and beloved presence at Poetry at Round Top. And I don't know, Jesse, if there's any kind of conversation yet about Poetry at Round Top happening in person next year, but
we're hoping to be back in person next year. We've got our fingers crossed, and I think it's going to be really wonderful. We're really looking forward to it. Wait, Travis, can I also just say,
please,
if people, I'm going to throw a link onto people should buy my chapbook from Susan.
Okay.
And not from Rattle, but if for whatever reason, they can buy it from me at jessebertron.com. I have like 500 copies. And if you buy it, like, please, I've got like 4 books of these things sitting in my room. So if you buy them from Susan, they'll come from me. Or if you buy them from me, they'll come from me.
Jesse, when will we have them? Tomorrow?
Yeah, I'll get them to you tomorrow. I'll drop them off.
Okay, cool.
So in that case, yeah, I don't know, Susan, can they go to Bookwoman and place an order then with you?
So because it's not carried by Ingram, we can't, we couldn't link on Bookshop.
Okay.
So people can just email me or
Okay.
call. So bookwoman.austin@gmail's the email, or they can go to our website, ebookwoman.com, and there's a hot link there.
Oh, fantastic. And I'm actually about to drop a link to the Bookwoman website here in the chat. So if you look in your chat feed, you can just navigate to where it says visit Bookwoman and get a copy of A Plumber's Guide to Light there. And Tiana's chapbook Equilibrium and her beautiful full length, I Can't Talk About the Trees Without the Blood, are available through Bookwoman as well.
I think I think we have a couple of copies at the store as well.
So yeah, go visit Susan, because it's the most amazing store, and just go talk with her, because she's the most amazing purveyor of wonderful books as well. And in the meantime, if you want some more, a little bit more of a poetry fix before next April, when Poetry at Round Top goes back in person, we want to just share a little bit about what's upcoming with Logos. So we have one more virtual gathering we'll be hosting in this sort of spring lineup, which is next month on the 8th of June. We'll be hosting Heidi Sanborn. Did I do this again? Heidi Seaborn, Seaborn. I'm sorry, Heidi. I think you're on the call. Yes, Heidi, there you are. I'm so sorry. You can just look at Heidi's wonderful smiling face on the Zoom screen and see how her name is properly spelled. And she'll be reading with the amazing Diane Seuss next month. So we're so overjoyed, Heidi, to be hosting with you. And then in July, we're going to be bringing a number of poets to Jackson, Wyoming. The Episcopal Church in Jackson has very graciously offered their wonderful campus space to host the first ever Wonder in Wyoming festival. So this is a collaboration between the entities formerly known as Logos Poetry Collective and EcoTheo Review. We're bringing Carrie Fountain, Diane Glancy, Joanna Klink, Gregory Pardlow, Spencer Reese, Paisley Rectal, and Mark Wunderlich out. And so it'll be a series of in-person Logos gatherings and also some workshops offered by our featured poets. And it's going to be a bit unwieldy to simulcast it. So we're going to have a videographer to produce a beautiful, professionally edited version of the gathering that'll be available by video. But you may be curious about this sort of new EcoTheo collective logo on your screen. And Jason's going to tell us a little bit about that and one of the projects we're most proud of.
Yeah, so some of you have been joining us for the last year, and EcoTheo Review and Logos have been partnering for these extraordinary virtual gatherings. And over that time, Travis and I have met countless hours and had incredible conversations, not just between ourselves, but with our collaborators with EcoTheo and building a board. And we are finally, today, we made the official announcement that EcoTheo Collective has been established. And so it's this partnership between EcoTheo Review and Logos Collective. And so we'll continue publishing the magazine as a quarterly print in quarterly print issues, as well as new work on the website 3 times a week. Our managing editor, Alex Barbara, and our reviews editor, Hannah Vanderhart, are here with us this evening. And we have amazing book reviews every Monday at ecotheo.org and great reviews that appear in the print issues as well. We'll continue hosting monthly gatherings online as well as Wyoming, and then hoping to get back in person at Lazarus and other in-person locations soon. We're hoping we'll be able to join us in Wyoming. And then we're really thrilled to be able to share today as well the inaugural fellows of the Starshine and Clay Fellowship. So Tiana was making reference to Lucio Clifton. This fellowship is named in honor of a line from her wonderful beloved poem, What You Celebrate With Me. And so we have these 4 incredible poets who Gregory Pardlow has selected. And so their work will appear in the summer issue of the magazine, and then all 4 of them to read with Greg and the other poets. And so we encourage you to subscribe to the magazine so that you'll be sure to receive your copy of the summer issue to read their work. There will be the work of 4 finalists published in that issue as well. So it's a great joy to realize this collaboration with Cave Canem and to be able to support emerging Black poets and honor the legacy of Lucio Clifton.
Thank you so much, Jason. I mean, it really does feel like just the work that we're proudest of, to have the honor of collaborating with Cave Canem and to offer this fellowship. And St. John's Jackson has been very supportive of this work as well. And it's just such a joy to have a chance to gather in such a life-giving way on these virtual calls. And I know that Tiana and Jesse have both graciously offered to stay on the call for a couple minutes to field a few more questions, although I know that we've already kept them 15 minutes longer than I had promised we would. So that conversational time might just be a bit briefer than it would had I been able to restrain myself and not ask so many questions. But as we move to close this evening, we'll be closing with a responsive reading by our benediction poem by Jane Kenyon. So as we move into that portion of the evening, I'll once again ring the prayer bell once more and just invite us to take another moment to ground and center ourselves in the space, and to keep our mics muted, but to read the bolded lines aloud so that we can also add our voice to this entire collective. But Tiana, Jesse, thank you so very much for blessing us with your poetry and presence, your words and wisdom, and your delight. You just, you both shine so brightly, and we've been really blessed to bask in that brightness tonight. So thank you both.
Wood thrush. High on Nardal and June light,
I wake at 4.
waiting greedily for the first note of the wood thrush,
Easeful air presses through the screen
with the wild, complex song
of the bird, and I am overcome.
by ordinary contentment.
Would it hurt me so terribly?
All my life, until this moment. How I love the small, swiftly beating heart
Of the bird,
singing in the great maples.
its bright, unequivocal eye.
Amen. That's Jane Kenyon.
Amen.
Amen. Indeed.
Amen and alleluia. Jesse, Tiana, everyone, thank you so much for being here. To everyone out there in the Facebook ether, thank you for spending your evening with us. We hope that it's filled with every joy and blessing and is infused with a bit more hope for you as we ease towards summer. And we look forward to welcoming you back here into the Logos space next month. So go in peace, y'all, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Jason. This is so beautiful.
Oh.
Thank you, Tiana.
Thank you, Jesse.